I found out my wife was planning to marry someone else, while still living under my roof. The words hit me like a freight train, the weight of their meaning pressing down on me with suffocating force. I stood frozen in the doorway, staring at my wife, the woman I had given everything to. She didn't even look at me. Her back was turned, her hands still busy packing the suitcase on the bed, as if this was just another casual chore. As if her decision to leave me had already been made. But it wasn't just the fact that she was leaving me, it was what she had agreed to next. She wasn't simply walking out the door to find herself or take a break. No, she was walking into the arms of another man, a man she had promised to marry. And to add salt to the wound, she'd made this decision without a single shred of remorse or hesitation. "I've already agreed to marry him," she said, her voice too calm for the storm that was raging in my chest. "You don't need to be here anymore. I'm leaving." Everything that I thought I knew about my wife, about our relationship, shattered in that instant. I had loved her with everything I had. I'd been faithful, supportive, and patient, always. Yet, she was planning a wedding with someone else, and not even a glance in my direction, not even a hint of guilt in her eyes. A part of me wanted to scream, to beg her to stay, but I was too proud. I wasn't going to beg. No, I would make her regret this. I would make her wish she had never met me, never crossed me. At that moment, I knew, this wasn't just the end of a marriage. This was the beginning of something much darker, something she would never see coming. The woman I had married wasn't always this cold. No, in the beginning, she had been everything I could ever want. Her name was Emily, and when we first met, she was radiant, full of life, always laughing, always looking forward to the next adventure. She had this wild energy that was contagious, pulling me out of my shell, forcing me to experience life beyond the rigid structure I had built around myself. I was a man of routine, of discipline. I liked my predictable, comfortable life. But with Emily, everything became chaotic in the best possible way. I remember our first date like it was yesterday, how she looked in that little blue dress, how she challenged me to think differently about everything. She was spontaneous, impulsive, unpredictable, while I was safe, grounded, and calculated. At first, it felt like we balanced each other perfectly. Where I was cautious, she was bold. Where I was reserved, she was expressive. I had never felt more alive than when I was with her. The proposal was supposed to be the climax of everything we'd built together. I had planned every detail down to the smallest of gestures. It was supposed to be a fairy tale. But what had started as a beautiful beginning had slowly devolved into something unrecognizable. In the years that followed, something changed. I couldn't pinpoint when it started, but I began to feel it, the distance, the coldness, the disconnect. At first, I blamed myself. Was I too predictable? Had I lost the spark she had fallen in love with? I worked harder, pushed myself to be more spontaneous, more exciting. But no matter how much I tried to surprise her, she remained distant. Emily's smiles became fewer, her laughs more forced, and those adventures that once brought us closer now seemed like distant memories. She stopped initiating conversations about the future. The long, intimate talks we used to have were replaced with awkward silences. It wasn't that we fought, but the love between us was fading. I told myself it was a phase, something we could work through. After all, relationships weren't perfect. But what I didn't realize was that Emily had stopped trying long before I did. As the years passed, I found myself drowning in the weight of her discontent. I tried to understand it, tried to talk to her about it, but every time I opened up, she shut me down. She wasn't angry, she wasn't even upset. She was just empty. She gave me enough to keep me holding on, just enough for me to think things might still be okay. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to believe it. And then came James. James was someone I had never truly noticed until the day Emily introduced him as a friend she had met through work. He was charming, easygoing, and far more exciting than I was. In a way, he reminded me of the person Emily used to be, free-spirited, unburdened, and full of life. I thought nothing of it at first. I trusted her. But it wasn't long before I noticed the subtle changes, the late nights she would spend with him, the texts that started to take longer to reply, the way her smile grew wider every time she mentioned his name. I told myself it was nothing. Just a friendship. She deserved friends, right? I didn't want to be the jealous husband, the overprotective type. But I could feel the tension. The air between us thickened. I could sense the shift, but I was too late. By the time I realized what was happening, the distance between us had grown beyond repair. I thought it was just an emotional affair. I thought it was just someone to talk to when she felt lonely or unfulfilled. But when she told me she was planning to marry him, I understood. It wasn't just an affair, it was a betrayal of the deepest kind. Emily had already made up her mind long before she ever uttered those words. She had decided, without consulting me, without a second thought, that her future lay with someone else. And I was just the man she was walking away from, discarded without even a trace of regret. But there was one thing Emily didn't know: I wasn't going to let this betrayal go unanswered. I wasn't going to stand by and let her destroy everything we had, everything I had given her. If she thought I was weak, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. I began to watch, to observe, to gather every piece of the puzzle she had left behind. The pieces I had ignored for too long were now clear to me. She hadn't just fallen in love with someone else, she had planned this escape for months. The lies, the subtle dismissals, the cold indifference, it had all been building up to this moment. She had already betrayed me emotionally, and now she was doing it physically. I knew what I had to do. But I wasn't going to play the victim. I wasn't going to beg her to stay. No, if she wanted to marry someone else, I would give her a gift she would never forget. It was time for her to understand that there was a price for betrayal. And as I stood there, watching her pack her bags, I made a silent vow. This wasn't the end of our story. It was just the beginning of something far more complex, far more dangerous. The moment I heard her voice, so calm, so final, telling me she was marrying someone else, everything inside me froze. But what hurt more than anything was the realization that I had been blind to the truth for far longer than I wanted to admit. I had been living in denial, holding on to a relationship that Emily had long since abandoned. As she zipped up her suitcase and turned to face me, I could feel the distance between us grow. Her eyes were cold, vacant, nothing like the warmth they once held. She wasn't even looking at me the way she used to, the way I used to look at her when we first met, with admiration, with affection. No, now she was looking through me. "I've already agreed to marry him," she repeated, as if this was some mundane announcement she was making, like sharing the news of a new job. "You don't need to be here anymore." I wanted to scream, to throw something at her, to make her feel the same gut-wrenching pain I was drowning in. But the words wouldn't come. I was paralyzed, a spectator in my own life. All the questions that I had been asking myself. The long hours of silence, the growing tension in our home, suddenly made sense. The pieces clicked together in a way that made my blood run cold. I thought I knew everything about Emily. I thought I had a handle on our relationship, on the woman I had spent years building my life around. But now, I was beginning to realize just how much I didn't know. How had I missed the signs? How had I let this happen? And then, as if her cold confession wasn't enough, she dropped the bombshell. "There's something else," Emily said, her eyes narrowing slightly as if measuring my reaction. "I've been seeing him, for months." The ground beneath me seemed to give way. Months? Months of betrayal, of lies, of deceit, right under my nose. I had been living with a woman who had already decided to leave me long before she ever uttered the words. How many times had she laughed in my face, made love to me, kissed me, all while knowing that she was planning to walk down the aisle with someone else? I felt sick, dizzy, like the world was spinning out of control. How could she do this to me? How could she betray everything we had built together with someone else? But worse than that, she had been so careful, so methodical in her deceit. I never saw it coming. Her voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. I didn't want to hurt you, but I couldn't keep lying to you either, she said, a false sense of sorrow creeping into her voice. This isn't about you, not really. I've just outgrown you. I've found something that makes me feel alive again. I stood there, silent, barely able to comprehend the gravity of what she was saying. Emily had outgrown me. Outgrown me. I wanted to ask her a million questions, about James, about everything she had done behind my back, but the words stuck in my throat. The truth was too painful. Too raw. It was easier to remain silent, to let the weight of the moment crush me than to face the reality of her betrayal. You don't need to stay, Kyle, she said, almost as if she were doing me a favor. I've made up my mind. It's over. Her words echoed in the silence that followed, each one a reminder that the woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted, had already moved on. My world was falling apart, piece by piece. But just as I was about to turn and leave, something in me snapped. I had always been the calm one, the logical one. But now, as the sting of betrayal tore through me, I realized I had been a fool. I had been playing. And I wasn't going to let it end like this. I wasn't going to walk away, defeated. I couldn't. I took a deep breath and looked her in the eyes. There was no more love there. Only coldness, only the remnants of a marriage that had never been what I thought it was. You think this is over? I asked, my voice low, steady. You think you can just walk out and marry him without consequences? Without paying for what you've done? Emily didn't flinch. She didn't even look surprised by my response. Instead, she shook her head, a sad smile creeping up on her lips. I don't think you understand, Kyle, she said. I've already moved on. I don't need you anymore. She was wrong. She couldn't have been more wrong. I stepped forward, my hands shaking with fury, with a sense of purpose that was born out of the deep sense of betrayal I felt. But before I could say anything else, she held up her hand, as if to silence me. Please don't, she said, her voice soft, almost pleading. You're just making this harder for both of us. Harder? She had no idea what hard it was. I stood there for a moment, the room thick with tension, before turning on my heel and storming out of the bedroom. As I walked down the hallway toward the front door, I heard her voice again, softer now, but still cutting through the silence. I'll be gone by morning. And that was it. She was gone. But as the door slammed shut behind me, something dark, something ruthless began to form inside of me. I had been betrayed, humiliated, made a fool of, but I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I wasn't going to let James get away with it either. If she thought she could walk away without consequences, she had another thing coming. I wasn't done with her. Not by a long shot. The days that followed Emily's departure were a blur. I moved through life in a haze, unable to comprehend the magnitude of what had just happened. I felt like a ghost in my own home. I would wake up, stare at the empty side of the bed where she used to lie, and the weight of her betrayal would crash over me all over again. I couldn't escape it. She wasn't just gone, she was already in someone else's arms, someone who, until recently, had been nothing more than a casual acquaintance to me. But as the hours dragged on and the silence of the house weighed heavier on my shoulders, I began to uncover more layers to the betrayal, ones I hadn't seen coming. Emily's infidelity wasn't just a sudden lapse in judgment. It was part of something far more calculated, far more sinister. The first hint came when I decided to confront James. I knew who he was the charming, well-groomed friend Emily had introduced me to months ago. But I never really paid attention to him before. I didn't feel threatened by him, not at first. But after Emily's revelation, everything changed. He was the man who had taken her away from me. He was the man who had stolen my wife right under my nose. I called him one evening, my fingers trembling as I dialed his number. When he answered, his voice was too calm, too casual. "Hey, Kyle," James greeted, as though he and I were old friends. "What's up?" I didn't bother with pleasantries. "Where is she?" I spat, the words coming out like venom. "Where is Emily?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, a shift in his tone, and then a laugh that made my blood run cold. "Relax, man. She's happy. You should be happy for her." "Happy?" I screamed into the phone. "She's marrying you, James. You took her from me, and now you're going to pretend like this is some kind of fairy tale?" Another chuckle. "Look, Kyle, you're a good guy. But Emily and we've been together for a while now. You're just too blind to see it." I clenched my fist, my mind racing. Together for a while? They had been seeing each other behind my back for months. I couldn't believe it. It was one thing for her to betray me, but for him to be so smug about it, like it was nothing, infuriated me in ways I hadn't thought possible. "We've been having an affair for almost a year," James continued, his voice now almost friendly. "She didn't want to hurt you, but we both knew it was only a matter of time before she made the right choice." That was when the first layer of betrayal struck. A year. A year of lies, of secrets. Emily had been playing me for so long that I didn't even realize it. She had lied to my face day after day, month after month, while I, the fool, was none the wiser. The pain of that realization hit me harder than any of the insults I had thrown at her. But it wasn't just an affair. There was something else, something that James hinted at in a cryptic, almost offhand way. "Listen, Kyle," James said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You don't know everything. There are things Emily's kept from you, things she's never told you. I wouldn't be so sure about the picture you're trying to paint." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. What was he talking about? What had Emily hidden from me? I didn't get the chance to ask any more questions. James hung up the phone without so much as a goodbye. That night, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't escape the thought that there was more to this story than I'd been told. I had to know what Emily had been hiding, what dark secrets she had kept from me. If there was one thing I had learned through this nightmare, it was that Emily had always been a mystery to me. She had a side to her that I had never understood, and now, I realized, she had been keeping that side from me for years. The next day, I decided to search through her things, just a few small items left behind in her absence. I went into our closet, and at the back of the shelf, I found something buried underneath old clothes. It was a small leather-bound notebook, one I had never seen before. As I opened it, I saw pages filled with scribbled notes, Emily's handwriting, of course, but it was different. The entries were erratic, frenzied. They weren't the kind of things you write when you're simply venting. No, these were confessions. As I read, my stomach churned. Emily had been seeing James not just emotionally, but physically long before she had admitted it. There were names, dates, and locations, places where they had met, places I had never suspected. But it was more than just the affair. The deeper I read, the darker it got. There were notes about me. Written in a tone that was cold, detached, almost clinical. "He's boring. I need something more. Kyle doesn't understand me. James listens. I don't know how to end things. It's easier to lie than to face the truth." I felt sick. She had been planning this, plotting this for months. She had been emotionally detached from me long before I had noticed, slowly replacing me with someone who was more exciting, more unpredictable. But what hurt the most was realizing how little she had actually cared about me. The woman I had trusted had never truly been mine. She had never truly loved me. She had been using me as a stepping stone until she found something, or someone, better. But the notebook didn't just reveal betrayal, it opened up something darker, something more complicated. There were mentions of someone else lurking in the shadows of their relationship. Someone Emily had met before James. Someone she had known when we first met. At first, I thought I was imagining things. But as I read deeper, the name, Chris, began to appear, always in the context of secrets, always hidden away. The more I dug, the more I realized that Emily's betrayal wasn't just with James. It was with someone else too. Someone who had been in her life long before I ever even knew her. And it wasn't just an affair, it was a series of lies, a network of manipulation, deceit, and betrayal that spanned years. I had been living in a house of mirrors. Every reflection of Emily I had ever seen was nothing but a mask, carefully constructed to hide the truth from me. I had been betrayed. My wife had left me for another man, a man who had been lurking in the shadows of our marriage for months. And now, I had learned the painful truth, Emily's lies were more intricate than I had ever imagined. There was more than just James. There was Chris, the ghost in our past, the shadow that had haunted us for years without me even knowing. Emily had played me like a fool. She had manipulated me, deceived me, and replaced me with someone else, not once, but twice. It was time for a reckoning. If she thought she could walk away without consequences, without ever facing the depth of her betrayal, she was gravely mistaken. I wasn't going to beg for her love. I wasn't going to apologize for not being the man she wanted me to be. No, I would make her regret ever crossing me. She needed to see the price of what she had done. But revenge is a complicated thing. It's not just about striking back in anger, it's about hitting where it hurts most, taking everything they value, and then leaving them to pick up the pieces. I needed to be patient. Calculated. Every step had to be precise. I couldn't just rush in with fury, I needed to dismantle her life piece by piece, making her feel the same helplessness I had felt when I realized she had already moved on. The first thing I did was reach out to Chris. He had been a name I found in Emily's notebook. He wasn't just some past lover or fleeting affair, he was someone who had been a part of her life long before I even knew her. Someone who had always been there in the background, always waiting for the right moment to step in. From the notes, I could tell he had been a constant figure, someone Emily had kept close but never mentioned. As if I was never meant to know. I knew Chris wasn't just some innocent bystander. No, he had been a willing participant in the lies, the deception. He had been complicit in this betrayal, just as much as Emily had. But he hadn't realized who he was dealing with. He didn't know me. He didn't know what I was capable of. The plan was simple but effective, I would use Chris to destroy Emily's carefully constructed facade. I reached out to him, pretending to be the hurt ex-husband who just wanted answers. I didn't reveal everything at once, but I played on his guilt, on his curiosity. I told him how I had discovered everything, how Emily had been seeing him behind my back, how she had lied to both of us. And just like that, he bit. Chris and I started meeting in secret. The more we talked, the more I realized that he wasn't as much of a threat as I'd originally thought. He had been consumed by his own desires for Emily, just as I had. He wasn't a mastermind or some villainous schemer, he was a pawn, a man who thought he could have everything he wanted without consequences. But what Chris didn't understand was that he, too, was disposable. He would serve his purpose, and then I would throw him away. The next part of my plan involved James. It wasn't enough that Emily had betrayed me with him, no, I had to make him feel just as betrayed as I had. I needed to show him that even though he had won, he hadn't truly gained anything. I had to break him down, make him question everything he thought he knew about Emily, about me, about himself. I started planting seeds of doubt in his mind. I texted him anonymously, sending cryptic messages about Emily's past with Chris, her manipulation, her lies. I planted rumors that Emily wasn't the woman he thought she was, that she had used him as a pawn in her twisted game of control. I told him how she had been planning this all along, how she had already set her sights on someone new. It didn't take long before the cracks began to show. James started pulling away from Emily, questioning her, asking her things she wasn't prepared to answer. He started showing signs of doubt, of frustration, and when Emily tried to explain herself, her words no longer carried the weight they once had. Slowly, I could see her world crumbling from the outside in. I had them both where I wanted them. The final step in my plan was the most difficult, and the most satisfying. I needed to confront Emily. I needed her to see the truth. That everything she had built, every lie she had told, was coming crashing down around her. But I wouldn't just confront her head-on, I would make her come to me. I would make her beg for my forgiveness, only to leave her in the dust once and for all. I knew Emily wouldn't reach out to me willingly. She was too proud, too cold to ever admit she was wrong. But I had something that would break her, something she had never expected, the truth about Chris. I arranged a meeting with her in a quiet, secluded restaurant, a place she would never suspect. I made sure she thought it was just another attempt to talk things through, a final meeting between us. I wanted her to feel safe, comfortable. I wanted her to think she had control. When she arrived, I saw it immediately in her eyes, relief, almost. Like she thought this was her moment to win me back, to explain herself and make everything right. She sat down across from me, that familiar smile creeping onto her face. "Kyle," she said, her voice soft, almost seductive. "I know this has been hard for you, but you have to understand. I was never happy. I needed this. I needed someone who could give me what you couldn't." I could feel the bile rising in my throat, but I kept my composure. I smiled. "I understand, Emily," I said, leaning forward. "I really do. That's why I want you to have everything you've wanted." She raised an eyebrow, confused. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I slid a folder across the table to her. Her eyes flickered from the folder to my face, then back again. Hesitant, she opened it. Inside were photos of her and Chris, together in the places I had never known about. It was everything she had hidden from me, everything she had kept from our marriage. The truth was right in front of her. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" I asked, my voice cold. "Did you think you could keep all of this from me forever?" Emily's face drained of color as she flipped through the pictures, her breath shallow. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with panic. "Kyle, you don't understand," she stammered. "Oh, I understand perfectly," I interrupted, standing up. "You've used me, lied to me, and replaced me. You've destroyed everything we had, and for what? For James. For Chris. You think I'm just some fool who will stand by while you destroy my life?" Her hands trembled as she tried to speak, but I wasn't interested in her excuses. I turned and walked toward the door, leaving her there, alone with the truth she had hidden from me for so long. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me as I stepped into the cool night air. I had done it. I had destroyed her carefully constructed world. And in the end, she was the one who had to face the consequences. As I walked away, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. But I knew this wasn't the end. No, this was just the beginning. There were more stories to tell, more betrayals to uncover. And Emily, well, she would always be the one who had pushed me too far. As I walked away from that restaurant, the weight of what I had just done began to settle in. The thrill of revenge, the satisfaction of watching Emily unravel as I had for so long, was almost overwhelming. For once, I could breathe again. I felt like I was free, not just from Emily, but from everything she had ever represented. The lies, the deceit, the betrayal, they were no longer part of my life. They no longer had a hold over me. But even as I walked into the night, a small part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. I had gotten my revenge, sure, but revenge, as it turns out, isn't the balm for every wound. It doesn't fill the emptiness left behind by someone you once loved. But for now, it was enough. Emily had gotten what she deserved. She had been exposed, stripped of her masks, forced to see the destruction she had caused, not just to me, but to everyone who had trusted her. It wasn't just the photos of her with Chris, or the lies about James that had crushed her. It was the realization that the woman she had tried so hard to control had finally broken free. She couldn't hold power over me anymore. I wasn't the man who would beg or grovel. I stood tall, watched her fall, and walked away. But as much as I felt like I had won, something gnawed at the back of my mind. What about James? What about Chris? These men, these players in the twisted game that had been my life, hadn't yet faced their reckoning. Emily had made her choices. She had betrayed me, but in the process, she had hurt them too. James, for all his bravado and arrogance, had been manipulated. Chris, too, was a pawn in her game, as much a victim as I had been. But what about their role in all of this? Were they just collateral damage? No. They weren't. They would have their turn. But that would be another story. As I stepped onto the quiet street, I felt something inside me change. I wasn't the same man who had walked into that restaurant. I had crossed a line, yes, but it was a line I needed to cross. I had done the unthinkable, but in the process, I had found strength in myself I hadn't known existed. I wasn't just the guy who had been betrayed, I was the man who had turned the tables, who had taken control of his life again. There was more to this story. Emily's betrayal, James's doubts, Chris's dark secrets, they were only the beginning of something far bigger, far more complicated. There were more lies to uncover, more revenge to take, and more power to reclaim. This wasn't the end. It was the start of something much, much darker. And as I looked into the night, I knew one thing for sure, I had only just begun. If you think this story is over, think again. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we dive even deeper into the lives of the men who betrayed me. James and Chris, they've been played, but now, it's their turn to feel the consequences. Don't miss it. Hit the subscribe button, leave a comment with your thoughts on this explosive twist, and stay tuned for the next chapter, because the best is yet to come.